My colleague Aaron Bastani recently went into the lion's den to debate communism, China, and Joseph Stalin with Camilla Tominey of the Daily Telegraph. Aaron, we're going to look at a few clips from that very interesting debate. You actually covered a lot of topics which are very dear to my heart. First of all, fill me in on the context. How did you end up sort of having an hour debate with Camilla Tominey on the Telegraph podcast? What were you invited on to discuss?
Well, our good friends at the Telegraph, I think I actually disagreed with Camilla about something on X, and I think I criticised the Telegraph. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't anything major. It was a policy disagreement, probably something like, I don't know, wealth tax, something like that. We disagreed, and then she said, oh, maybe we should get you back on. And then one of the producers got in touch, and I went to Telegraph Towers. Lovely big building, lots of money, great resources, and yeah, we had the conversation.
Let's look at it, come on. So parts of the debate were riffing off Aaron's book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism.
My understanding of the premise of your book and how one achieves luxury communism, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, because I might have got it wrong, is that you want to create this society where automation and technological advances mean that the working classes don't need to do the menial chores anymore, and that society will flourish because they are freed into a different direction where with state help they will be supported to have more enriched lives. Is that a fair summary?
Well, the idea that people are not going to be doing manual work, horrible backbreaking work, I mean, that might happen under capitalism just because of levels of automation with people like Elon Musk driving it and whatnot. And that brings its own problems because, of course, that's going to create greater inequality. Lots of people won't be able to access work, blue-collar jobs that have provided lots of work for people over the decades. Driving is the great example right now, I think. Something like 3.5 million people drive for a living in the United States. If you have self-driving cars, those jobs disappear. So the automation bit's happening. The question is who's going to benefit from it is the kind of the central part of the book. And you don't, have to be a radical socialist to think it shouldn't be billionaires and oligarchs. It could be a relatively widespread sort of affluence, like we saw after the Second World War.
But back to the Chinese example, aren't they building houses and roads and other things at an alarmingly quick rate because the workers there are on very low wages and possibly being abused?
I've never been to China.
But you've got experience of China having abused the human rights of its own citizens.
So again,
right?
If I speak to people from China, I've spoken to British people who've been to China, and they say, I would rather be born in Britain, the whole John Rawls, veil of ignorance. But actually, having seen how old the people live there, I think it's perhaps the best place in the world to be an old person. That's what they've said to me. But again, I don't want to talk with kind of, raw sincerity because I've never been to China.
So we're going to go on to, we'll see a few more clips, but from listening to the whole thing, especially talking about folk, so fully automated luxury communism, what kind of struck me was that Camilla Tominey was almost coming from a similar place, not, apologies, James Butler, not sort of in the totality, but when you did your first folk interview with James Butler, I remember sort of his big critique was, you're all into abundance, because you think we can have this radical abundance. But isn't that based on the exploitation of resources and the exploitation of labor in countries like China?
Yeah.
And that was her critique.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. Right?
Yeah. Because exploitation doesn't happen in Britain, of course.
Yeah, that's what was quite strange about it. Because if you're going to critique kind of the Chinese model, the fact that they exploit labor that might be the sort of Trotskyite critique.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it works as the critique from the right, because obviously capitalism does that too.
Yeah. It's quite interesting when people from the right say, oh, it's state capitalism, it's not communism. You say, okay. Like you said, this is something that Trotsky would say. I don't think that, by the way. I don't think it is state capitalism.
We can come on to that. We've got a clip on that. Let's look at this next clip, because this is the one that sort of they clipped to put at the beginning of the interview. I don't know if it was supposed to be as a gotcha or just a sort of taster of what was to come.
Don't you think that the development of these electric cars and all of these solar panel and other, frankly, there's an irony here, by the way, because they're building these coal-fired power stations while at the same time exporting all of this gear to countries like us that lap it up, that want it hook, line and sinker without asking the real questions about who's being abused in the process. So why are you giving them the benefit of the doubt in China with their own people and the Uyghurs, and not giving them the benefit of the doubt in the Congo? Why would they behave differently in the Congo than they would of their own country?
Well, just from what I've read. But
you're forgiving them this because they're communists,
I'm
and
not-
you can't
I'm not
bear the
forgiving-
idea of communists being bad people.
No, communists have been very bad people.
Okay, good. I'm glad we agree on
No,
that.
like, so-
well, there are some on the left that don't think Stalin was that bad. And actually, you know, look at Jeremy Corbyn in his bloody little red book. Oh, Chairman Mao. Actually, he was a big, friendly, cuddly bloke who wasn't responsible for millions of deaths during the
Mao
Cultural
did some
Revolution.
evil stuff, but he was also, you know,
Yeah.
he was one of the great historical figures of the 20th century.
Imagine
he just
doing
was.
that. Imagine saying that about Hitler.
But in what regard?
Well, that's a bit like saying
Hitler took over. Okay, now you
Hitler
make your
was
argument, I'll
an
respond.
evil Nazi, but he was a good orator. Isn't
He was a good orator.
That was very entertaining.
It's true.
People in the comments have said, you put that at the beginning, but what Arab Bastani said is obviously completely true there.
Of all the criticisms against Hitler, he was a bad public speaker. I've never heard that one before.
Actually, let's go straight on to our next clip, because I don't want to preempt sort of what we're going to get onto. Because again, before the comment about Hitler and oratory, again, she was talking about how sort of Chinese development is based on the exploitation of labor and the exploitation of resources, which again is kind of the Trotskyite criticism of Chinese development, not really the right-wing one. And this all relates to one of our favorite debates to have, the extent to which China is capitalist. So let's go to that clip, that part of the debate.
China today is a market economy, but it's not a capitalist economy. And we can learn a lot from it.
I don't know why you're arguing that it's not a capitalist economy.
So
it's based on free markets. It's based on the creation of wealth to create jobs.
So, you know, if you look at a company like Huawei or Cattle, a big player in batteries, or BYD, because banks in China are socialized, they can give very low interest rate loans to many of these companies, large and small. And that allows these companies to sell products with razor-thin margins, but of course at huge scale.
Yeah.
Companies in the West can't do that for a ton of reasons, because of, you know, we have shareholders, because the costs of accessing credit are much higher.
Well,
101
also
reasons.
we can't compete with low energy costs in Chinese factories fueled by carbon.
Chinese energy costs aren't necessarily that. A great example of
Chinese energy costs are considerably lower than ours.
Taiwan, high energy costs actually, but they have this $1 trillion company with
well, they're making all of these
TSMC.
microchips. But hang on, I must take issue with this. Do you think the workers on the factory floor in China, or indeed in the sweatshops, think that there's anything luxurious about the communism?
Their
You're being
system
very
is
selective.
No, I'm really not. I think
Yeah,
if you look at India and you look at China, I know, and I'm sure if anybody, and you as well, if you're being totally honest, what country would you rather have been born in the last 30 years? I think China is an economic miracle when you look at the last 50 years.
Under no circumstances on earth would I wish I was born in China in the last 30 years.
Rather than India.
Can you address? Oh, I see. Not rather than the UK.
Well, no, but the UK had several hundred years head start.
Fine. But can you just answer the question about the actual workers on the factory floor, and indeed in the sweatshops of China, in the Xi'an factories and beyond? You think they're enjoying luxury communism?
I don't think the process they go through is any different to what happened with this country's working class over the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
No, I'm
it's
talking
the same.
about it.
Again, very interesting. Very much enjoyed it. I thought it was a very productive conversation. You both come across as, you know, quite charming, open-minded people. I suppose what I want to put to you here, because I think there was something strange about the conversation, even if it was sort of fun to listen to, because she was a right-winger who I thought was making a left-wing critique of China.
Yeah.
And you're a left-winger saying that actually sort of Chinese development, yes, there are these injustices, but Chinese development probably makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right. And I suppose my position here is a bit different to both of yours. So I am pro-China in the sense that I think that Chinese development has been a net good. I think that, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And they are still lifting millions of people out of poverty, and the middle class is constantly growing. And having been there, you know, it doesn't seem like you're living in 1984, right? It seems like there is a social contract which is generally working, and that to the extent that people are sort of exploited in their work, or at least, you know, they have difficult times in their work, there seems to be a general societal understanding that we are getting rich, in the sense that there is social mobility, our children will do better than we do, and so we're willing to take the downsides of the system to benefit from the upsides. That's my impression. Now, obviously, I can't speak for 1.4 billion Chinese people, and actually I did meet people who disagreed, because I met people who had a more Trotskyist critique of of the Chinese Communist Party. Obviously, these weren't just random people I bumped into in the street. These were people who I was sort of linked up with. But what I find, I suppose, difficult to come to terms with or get on board with is people who are pro-Chinese development but anti-capitalist. Because I think that all the things that are sort of defensible and justifiable about the Chinese system, whether or not you call it capitalist, because I think it's almost semantic whether or not you say China is capitalist or it's communist or yada yada, market communism. But nearly all of the moral problems that people have with capitalism, the Chinese system also has. And the strongest argument for capitalism, as it's existed in the West for the last couple of hundred years, is to say that yes, it does have these injustices, it does have these imbalances of power, but ultimately what it has brought about is the greatest levels of economic development and increases in living standard in human history. And therefore, as a package, it's worth it. And I would say that the justification for the Chinese system is exactly the same. So I'm in a way, I've become less ideological as I've grown older. And I'm very much just into like development. Sort of, I look at the outcomes. If the outcomes are development, then yes, probably the package can be acceptable. Yeah, we'll make reforms here and there to try and make it fairer, to try and make it more tolerable, to try and make it more civilized. But the existence of injustices doesn't mean we can reject the package. And I feel like the only way you can possibly defend the Chinese system is to say, yes, the overall development justifies the injustices because the package is worth it. And I want to put that to you, because you've written a book called Folk. So are you someone who's pro-China and anti-capitalist, or are you someone who is open to the Chinese model of development and the Western model of development?
I'm not an anti-capitalist. I'm a communist. I'm a Marxist. Marx never said I'm an anti-capitalist. He wrote a book called Capital. He viewed capitalism as a necessary precursor stage to communism, which is the highest stage of production. And communism is only possible with the fullest unleashing of the forces and liberation of production, which is the same reading on political economy that you get from Deng Xiaoping after the mid-1970s. So this anti-anything. Look, when you had capitalism, Adam Smith and David Ricardo didn't say, I'm anti-feudalism. No, they were talking about a new mode of production.
But so the argument you put forward there, that's not how I would see the difference between the UK and China. I wouldn't say sort of.
But I've got moral critiques of capitalism. I've got moral critiques of all kinds of social and economic systems. But the historical Marxist critique of capitalism is not a moral critique. It's about a set of contradictions internal to the system which cannot be resolved.
But so I still think that that's not what we're seeing with the West and China. So the Marxist model was to say you begin with capitalism, then there will be these contradictions, and then therefore out of that.
Well, there are a ton of readings actually.
But that seems to me
the idea that they all agree.
But that seems to me what you're suggesting there, right?
No,
it's not a moral critique.
So somebody like
it's stages. So capitalism comes, then there's communism. Whereas to me, it looks like there are two parallel paths. There's a path of Western development, which was actually much better at dealing with crises than Marx ever predicted. And
Why? Because there was the political alternative of the USSR. And the minute that disappears, capitalist West falls apart in terms of trying to give any decent share of increases in productivity to the working class. So, it's true. Marx geopolitically, there were literally two poles in the world after 1945, and to get legitimacy, the capitalist West obviously has to give a decent share to the working class. Of course, Marx didn't foresee that. No, but who could?
His argument was that that capitalism couldn't resolve its own crises, and clearly it was able to. Maybe it needed some outside pressure, but it was able to. And I think you've got this parallel path.
How has it?
How has it? Yeah. Well, because he thought that there would just be the endless immiseration of the working class.
The immiseration
and that hasn't happened, right? The middle class has grown and grown and grown, right? I mean, at the moment, we're in a bit of a stagnant place, but that's for the last 15 years. Up until that point, the middle class was growing and growing and growing.
But hold on,
that's not growing and growing and growing across the world.
No. The contradictions are, for instance, one contradiction is capitalism wants ever greater efficiency in terms of producing goods and services, so it produces more goods and services with less human labor over time. Obviously, and I think this is happening, that's going to lead to higher levels of automation. The problem is to reproduce your life under capitalism, you need access to a wage to buy the goods and services being made. So we have more goods and services made more efficiently than ever before, but fewer people accessing a wage to buy those goods and services. That's a contradiction that leads to underconsumption. And you don't need to be a Marxist to believe in that. Keynes talks about it. There are loads of underconsumptionist critiques of capitalism, which aren't even particularly radical.
But they're not. But they're social democratic. That's not a contradiction of capitalism.
That is a contradiction
that can be resolved.
Yeah, by radical social democratic policies. That's one contradiction. There are many.
Not Marx. Like Keynes wasn't a Marxist.
No, I'm saying it is a contradictory system that is not homeostatic and self-regulating. Actually, neoclassical economics thinks that it is. That's the whole point of bloody supply and demand, of all their stupid econometric tables. It is homeostatic and self-regulating. That's the big difference, even between somebody like you and Tom Harwood. Tom Harwood's like, literally, just get out of the way. Let it do its work and everything will be fine. It's utopian nonsense.
But that's why I'm a Keynesian, really, not a Marxist.
But that's one contradiction. We can talk about other contradictions too, whether it's climate, whether it's social reproduction. So, for instance, the big contribution of Rosa Luxemburg, we've talked about this many times. If we're looking at capitalism, what is capital? Capital is value in motion, money making money. That's capital, right? That's a wheel turning to generate more value. And Marx is the first to say that capitalism as a mode of production is really good at creating more value. Some of it's fake and really bad, like, vape shops and betting, but it's often very good, right? But the point is, you can only reproduce that circle that's creating more value if you have two other circles. One is social reproduction. Okay, where is the labor coming from? It's coming from people. What are people? Once upon a time, they were babies. Who's reproducing the babies? It's families, often women. They're doing that for free. Another one is nature. Nature is an input into production. And often we're viewing nature as what he calls the free gifts of nature. There's a level of abundance that's presumed with nature. So, again, that's just a Marxist understanding of contradictions.
Or a Keynesian understanding, or a Polanyian understanding?
No, I don't think Keynes talks about that at all, actually.
We could debate this for ages, but I did say at the beginning of the show,
you're mischaracterizing me, Michael. You say you can't be pro-China and anti-capitalist, and I'm saying I'm not an anti-capitalist. I'm saying I agree with something like Deng Xiaoping, which says that China is developing the force of production to ascend to a new mode of production.
I don't think you can
Bukharin said the same.
I don't think you can be pro-China and too critical of the Western model of development, is basically what I'm saying.
Well,
because
you could have
both of them have the same compromise.
You could have said the same about
the same outcomes.
You could have said the same with the 5-year plans and Stalin. You could have said the same with Lenin when he was visiting, when he was adopting Taylorist principles of industrial production, and they were saying, let's build our factories like the Americans. You said, well, that's not real. By the way, people did. That's not real communism. You're doing this.
But even if it is, I'm not saying, is it or is it not real communism? I'm saying the best argument for the Chinese model and the best argument for the Soviet model, if you want to make one, is that it brought about development. Yes, it had these compromises. Yes,
you have to, development, of course, has to bring about development.
But development happened, and that can also be said for Western capitalism.